Yeah.
Hoi! Now, final bits of health and safety. If anything happens to me on this tour, if I become ill or unconscious or I fall into the water, laugh and take a photo or video, of course. But no, just remain calm, let the boat come to a natural stop. And behind the seat just in front of you, there should be everything you'll need to survive 6 feet of water.
Okay.
We have never needed this, but we do have to tell you about it. And that is all the boring stuff out of the way. Ahoy! Ahoy! First time. Now, just a heads up for the little ones, if they are scared of pigeons at all, there's going to be quite a few of them underneath this building.
Okay.
So just thought I'd give you a little bit of a warning.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. Thank you. Pigeons are not allowed.
So that was 10 years after the death of that Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket.
Are these houses? Are these?
So this used to be a building called the Eastbridge Hospital. Now, although it was called a hospital, you couldn't actually go there to be cured of any diseases or injuries. It was actually just a place of hospitality.
Okay.
So pilgrims would travel down to Canterbury, and as soon as they arrived in the city centre, they'd be presented with the Eastbridge, which was a place they could rest, and they'd actually be given a free meal in the evening as well. That meal was quite often a thin, watery gruel, which was sort of the peasants' equivalent to porridge. Not a very appetizing dish, I will be honest, but if I was a starving pilgrim, I highly doubt I'd say no to it. Now, this section of tunnel that we're passing through just here is actually known as the Mill Race. Now, this was integral to Canterbury's burgeoning industry back in the day. So what they would do is they would take a flat-bottomed boat, just like this one, and they would load it with cloth, grain, leather, and ale, all of the popular exports at the time. The boat would float downstream, just like we're doing now. It would then stop at the very mouth of the tunnel where you can see those black steel arches. A trapdoor would open above the boat, and some poor, sweaty, underpaid worker would have to lift all of those goods into the King's Mill, which used to be the building in operation just above us. Eventually, the King's Mill was actually given away to Thomas Becket's sister by way of an apology for Thomas's brutal murder in the middle of the cathedral itself. Hoi! Now, the murder of Thomas Becket is actually English history's most well-known misunderstanding. You see, the king at the time, King Henry II, was quoted as saying about Thomas Becket, "Won't somebody rid me of this troublesome priest?" Now, we do understand that what the king wanted to happen was that Becket would be fired from his position as Archbishop. The knights misunderstood. Instead, they travelled down to Canterbury and they attempted to arrest Becket in the middle of the cathedral. When Becket naturally resisted arrest, they decided to remove the top of his head from the rest of his body, for lack of a better term. And in fact, if you are wandering around the cathedral, you may notice there is a spot where Thomas Becket's name is written in red paint on the ground. That is to signify the exact spot where he lost his life. Now, here on my right-hand side, we have the most historical building in all of Canterbury, the gorgeous, ancient Pizza Express, which of course wasn't always a pizza restaurant. This building used to be a blacksmith's forge. Part of the reason we know this was a forge is just beyond these bay windows here, there's actually a door going straight onto the water. Now that door used to have a jetty fixed to it, so boats could come along, moor up, and take all of the goods down to the market to sell them on full price. Although we nowadays use these boats purely for leisure, they were actually the backbone of Canterbury's delivery service. Now, if you'd like to live out your Venetian fantasy for about 30 seconds, please feel free to sing a lovely rendition of Cheers There Luna as we pass underneath this bridge. The acoustics are quite lovely. I won't be singing because I can't sing, and despite what everyone says, I am not a gondolier.
Let it go, let it go. God never thought of me anyway.
Cheers, guys. Now we have two beautiful historical buildings coming up just ahead of us. Now these are the only two remaining buildings of the 13 that made up the Blackfriars Priory here in Canterbury. If you've been to London and you've seen Blackfriars Station, then the name should ring a bell. It was the exact same monks. Now they were Dominicans. They travelled all the way from Barcelona in the year 1221. They arrived here and were given an audience with King Henry III. Now, when I say that the Blackfriars were given a meeting with King Henry III, please do bear in mind, Henry was only 14 years old at this time. So when the monks decided to preach for 3.5 hours straight, it is not surprising that the teenage king gave them a plot of land here in Canterbury that stretched from where we were just a few seconds ago all the way up to the High Street. So you could imagine that every property we've just passed once belonged to the Blackfriars. That gives you a good idea of just how powerful they really were. They were also given £500 in cash and unlimited lumber from green forest to build upon their land. Now, I'm not saying that the king gave the monks these gifts so they would leave him alone, but if I was 14 and a royal, I probably would have done the exact same. Now, although they were very powerful monks, the Blackfriars were not the most popular monks here in Canterbury. They had a really nasty habit of extorting money out of the people living here. What they would do is they would wander around and they would accuse you of different forms of heresy. Then they would report you to the necessary authorities and collect the finder's fee on your behalf. A bit disrespectful to say it, but think of it as a religious protection racket, if you will. A theocratical yakuza, if you wish. It's time for my favourite bit of the story.
Does it get deeper over there? Is it deeper over there?
So we would go down there, however, 6 gates are open at the moment, so sometimes if we do that, we actually get stuck.
Alright.
Not implying that I'm weak or anything.
Yeah, that is.
I am. But no, those over there are the Victorian sluice gates.
Okay.
Now they were installed in the year 1829 to prevent flooding here on the River Stour.
Okay.
This is a naturally occurring river, so flooding is a real problem.
Yeah.
Hence why 6 gates being open is an issue. There's only 12 gates there,
Okay.
so it is quite speedy. Technically, there's also 6 gates underneath the water surface, but if they're open, we're not allowed to operate the boats. So,
Okay.
yeah, if that happens, then someone from the council has to come down and they have to rescue us, and it's very awkward for everyone involved. Now, I was mentioning about how the Blackfriars like to make their money. And one of the ways that they did this was actually quite strange for holy men to be doing. They would brew and sell alcohol in order to turn a profit. That's why we have a park here on my right-hand side, which is called Solly's Orchard. At the moment, obviously, it's not much of an orchard, but in the summer months, we grow apples, pears, cherries, plums, and quinces, all in this location. and it's all part of Punting. So if you're back in the future, feel free to take as much as you want. I actively encourage you to do so.
Okay.
But yes, the fruit was used to brew a beverage called hard cider. Now, usually when you put the word hard in front of a drink, that means you've added alcohol to it.
Okay.
But if cider's already alcoholic, well, that means hard cider would be quite strong. And it was. It was 8% alcohol by volume, twice as strong as the cider we sell nowadays. Which is why I find it quite confusing that this drink was given away to builders as a part of their daily wages. So if you wander around Canterbury and you wonder why so many of our buildings look so crooked and like they're all falling apart, well, drunk builders might have had something to do with that.
Okay.
Now the reason why this beverage was given away to builders was because although the River Stour is very clean nowadays, that wasn't always the case. They used to dump their sewage directly into the river. So if you can't drink the river water, cider is somehow the next best option.
Yeah.
Now of course the Blackfriars wouldn't just give away this drink, they actually kept quite a lot of it for themselves. In fact, the average Blackfriar would have access to about 8 pints of cider every single day, totally free of charge. So if you know anyone who's willing to take up the cloth, I'm sure they'd be willing to work out a sponsorship.
Is that why the bottles are kept there? Is that why the bottles are kept there?
Honestly, I kind of wish it was. No. So this used to be, if you serves me correctly, this was the refectory for Blackfriars. Now, it's just behind this large looking object.
Yeah.
There. You'll notice that door looks quite tiny, especially for the time. That's because this building was actually built so close to the river, it started to flood, to the tune of flooding about once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So eventually they actually had to raise the foundations over time to counteract the flooding, which is why we have doors like this one that look impossibly small to actually get through.
Okay.
Yeah, strangely, if you think about it, the ground level in that building is actually below the waterline of the river. Gives you a good idea of just how bad the flooding really was. Now, of course, it's not really surprising, seeing as this is a chalk bed, so all of the soil around here is very porous. So maybe building 2 massive crawling stone buildings wasn't quite a straight. Speaking of ideas that weren't very bright, just up ahead of us, on my left-hand side, you might actually notice there's a little tomb just next to the Blackfriars' old refectory building. Now, that tomb used to be completely grown over with ivy. We had no clue that it was actually there. Now it's been uncovered, we know that that used to house the body of the canon of the Blackfriars. He was essentially their most senior, high-ranking member. Now, the story goes, he was murdered by one of his handlangers who was getting quite jealous of his interactions, let's say. So she decided to feed him a slice of poisoned pork pie. Now, that would be absolutely fine. However, back in those times, they were very superstitious, and they believed that if you died via poison and you were buried by the river, that poison would actually seep out of your body and into the water itself. So I'm sure you can see the issue with burying him just upstream from the orchard where they grew the apples. So eventually the canon's body was exhumed from his coffin, and then it was brought over to the cathedral where I do believe it still rests to this day. Which would be absolutely fine, except for the woman who was responsible for killing him was also eventually found in the cathedral. So I'm sure they're having some lovely conversations in the graveyard. That is, if you believe the legend. Now here we are, floating past the Marlow Theatre, here on my right-hand side.
Okay.
Now this version of the Marlow Theatre was built in about 2011. This cost us, the Canterbury taxpayers, about £26 million for this design just here, which the architect did tell us is in keeping with Canterbury's medieval and Roman history. I will of course let you come to your own conclusions about how successful the design actually was. While I may have my issues with the... While I may have my own issues with the exterior of the theatre, the interior has remained largely unchanged over the years. It's actually a beautiful example of a lyric theatre. And one quite nice thing about the theatre as well is the very large spire on the very top of it that actually glows different colours at night to signify what kind of shows they're playing in that evening. If it's anything family friendly, I believe it'll be a blue light, and if it's anything more adult oriented, it'll be red, which is actually a really nice way to show people what you've got going on that evening. Christopher was actually born right here in Canterbury. Unfortunately, he could not spend the last days of his life in the city where he was born. You see, Christopher Marlowe was tragically murdered at the young age of 29, just outside of Devon. Now, there's two stories you are likely to hear about Marlowe's death. The first is that he was just drinking with his friends that night. Came time to pay the bill at the end of the evening. All of these men were very drunk, very proud, very British. So they all wanted to pay the bill in full. An argument broke out, it got a bit heated, and Christopher ended that fateful evening with a 6-inch long steak knife embedded into his left arm. So if anybody wanted to buy me a beer that badly, I'd be inclined to do it. Now that is the most common story you hear about Marlowe's death. However, we believe at the Canterbury Punting Company that Marlowe was actually assassinated. And the reason we believe he was assassinated is because Christopher Marlowe was actually a spy for the royal family. There's a few reasons we believe Marlowe was a spy. Number one, he was routinely arrested on different European borders, but he would never give a good enough explanation as to why he was there. Secondly, some of Marlowe's own personal diaries seem to suggest he was a very close friend of the spy master for the royal family. In fact, some legends suggest the spy master was present at the ball where Marlowe eventually met his end, although we aren't sure whether he was the one who gave the order or did it himself. Christopher Marlowe was a spy is because he was said to hold a degree from the University of Cambridge, which is quite strange because we know for a fact Marlowe never attended the University of Cambridge, not even once. And yes, Cambridge was the preferred university to give you a degree from if you've done some good work for the royal family in the past. I realise now when I say it like that, it actually makes Marlowe sound like a really bad spy. He was a bit more Johnny English than James Bond, I suppose. I don't want that to besmirch Marlowe's memory or to make anyone think less of him. He was an incredibly talented pilot, one of the most talented of all time, to the point where even William Shakespeare was a massive fan of Christopher Marlowe's work. In fact, when William found out that Marlowe had met his untimely end, he proclaimed that he, Shakespeare, would have given up every play he had the opportunity to write so that he could witness Marlowe write just one poem. I do think as an artist that is one of the most heartfelt ways to show your appreciation to a fellow artist. Now, just very quickly before we head underneath that bridge, here on my right-hand side is the old Weaver's House. This is actually the second most photographed building here in Canterbury, so I will give you some time to admire its gorgeous Tudor appearance, or Tudor facade, I should say. Now it's quite good that I said that this is a Tudor facade, because it is just that. This entire appearance that you see is actually fake. This was actually bolted into the front of the building by the Victorians. Now there's two ways that you can tell this is not a genuine Tudor appearance. The first is that many of these bars are far too straight and symmetrical, not to mention they're actually constructed of metal. That's the first dead giveaway. The second is a really pedantic point. So this building here is black and white, yes? Tudor buildings traditionally were not black and white. That's actually a myth that's been spread for generations at this point. To take the truth, Tudor houses were pebble dash white and a colour called ox blood brown, which is a shade of brown that becomes so dark due to the amount of iron in the ox's blood, you would be forgiven for thinking it was black at a glance. Like I say, it is a very pedantic point and nobody cares about it apart from me. But it does mean that now, whenever you go to an English town or city, you can immediately spot which buildings are fake, which is my favourite thing to do whenever I go travelling. Actually, I think we should have maybe dug up here on the left. Very scraggly looking thing. Before I worked here, I always thought that doves and pigeons were two different birds. Turns out they're not. They are genetically identical. I find that really confusing because here in England it's considered romantic to release doves at a wedding, but if I release pigeons, all of a sudden I've ruined the occasion and I had to be escorted off premises. Although, if you're a big fan of doves or languages that nobody in this country speaks, my name, Callum, in Gaeilge or Irish, actually translates to dove. So there you are. The most useless thing I'll tell you on this tour.
That's nice to know.
Oh, just very quickly before we do leave, I mentioned that the old Weaver's House, that appearance is fake. If you want to see an example of what a Tudor building should look like, gorgeous example just ahead of us on my left-hand side.
This one.
Yeah, the white building just there. That's what a Tudor building can look like. Do not tell me what it looked. I think you'll agree it's actually different.
Yeah. So was that a rebuilt one? When was that rebuilt?
So the old Weavers, it was less rebuilt. It was more so that the Victorians knew it was a Tudor building, but in their eyes it didn't look Tudor enough. So they created a fake Tudor appearance and literally bolted it onto the front. So if we were to go back there and rip all that down, there is a real Tudor building just crying to be set free. And as someone who moved to Canterbury because he really likes Tudor architecture, that was quite upsetting for me to find out. What? And in fact, the reason that they would actually paint their houses with ox's blood is because the iron bonded with the wood and it would create a sort of weatherproof coating both for the exterior and interior of the houses. It was actually a really good idea. It was very economical as well. Although, as someone who was trying their best to be vegan when I moved here, the idea of painting ox's blood onto my house eventually seemed that appealing. What? Go. this bridge just here, this actually holds a really good rule here in Canterbury. If you see a structure like this bridge that has a section of red bricks that don't match the foundations, that means it was destroyed during World War II. Now yes, unfortunately, Canterbury was one of the main targets for the Germans. This was a series of raids known as the Baedeker Raids or the Baedeker Blitz, if you ask anyone over here. Now, we called them the Baedeker Raids because we believed the Germans were using travel guides written by Baedeker. If you've never heard of them before, think of them as the German version of the Michelin guides. Now, I'm going to be totally honest with you. Calling them the Baedeker Raids was propaganda. It was a way for the British government to convince the people of this country that the Germans had, for lack of a better phrase, lost the plot. They were no longer focusing their firepower on military installations. Instead, they were dumping it all into the river, tannery, and cathedral here in Canterbury. We now know this was a demoralisation plot. It's a way to weaken the populace and make them far more susceptible to an invasion. As you can see, the invasion never happened, and the morale in Canterbury was not affected. In fact, the threat of bombs flying overhead just made the people of Canterbury want to fight even harder. We actually owe the continued existence of our cathedral to a volunteer service. Now, they were known as the Fire Watchers. It was the job of the Fire Watchers to stand on the roof of the cathedral, armed only with a bucket of sand and a shovel. They would wait for the Luftwaffe to pass overhead and drop magnesium-shelled firebombs. You remember your chemistry, then magnesium plus oxygen equals white-hot flame. So, the fire watchers would cover the bombs in sand to stop the exothermic reaction, and they would toss the smouldering remains to the grounds below. Yes, you may be quite shocked to learn that the casualty numbers during that time were a whopping 0. We actually didn't lose anyone to the fires on the cathedral itself. So yes, when I say that these people were immeasurably brave, I really do mean immeasurably brave. Now I say people and not men, because yes, men were members of the Fire Watchers service as well, usually the wives or daughters of soldiers who currently fought on the fronts, as well as young men who were too young to be sent over to fight, and veterans of the Great War who still wanted to do something for their country. I've actually been able to meet quite a few people whose family members were fire watchers during the war, and rightfully so, it is something that people hold a lot of pride in, as they well should. What? Right. As I'm sure you can see, this is where the river gets really fast and very shallow.
Yeah.
So I might stop talking for a couple of minutes.
That's
and
fine, that's fine.
just get us back in one piece.
Yeah.
But if anyone has any questions, do feel free to ask. I'll do my best to answer.
So this is River Store, right?
Yes, the River Stour. Yes. Now, the name Stour comes from the Anglo-Saxon word stur, which means a fast-flowing, raging, or actually a stubborn river. Actually, stubborn is the root word of it.
Okay.
So much so that you might have heard here in England, people very rarely say it anymore, but they might describe someone as being stout. Now, that actually does come from the word stout. Stout meaning stubborn, and also stout, the type of alcohol, which as an Irishman, I'm very happy about that fact. Yes. Now, seeing as a Stour is a fast-flowing and stubborn river, then the opposite of a Stour, an ooze, is a slow, sluggish river. That is actually where we get the word ooze, which refers to like a semi-viscous liquid.
And the most common name for a river here in England is the River Avon. Now, strange thing about the River Avon, Avon literally translates to river. So if you ever look at the River Avon, then I hope you enjoy the River. Same with punting, actually. Before you go and tell your friends and family that you went on a punt boat today,
Yeah.
just know that that means boat. Yes, when these boats were brought over, we asked the engineers who designed them, what is the name of this invention? And they replied, punter. So we called them punts and we thought nothing of it, only to find out a couple of decades later, punter just means boat. The best equivalency I could draw is if you go into any number of restaurants here in Canterbury, you'll probably hear people ordering chai tea, naan bread, any number of things, all of which have the same issue, tea, bread. One of the ones that people very rarely seem to realise though, Sahara Desert just means desert. And my favourite one that you can always make fun of us having in the UK, there is a hill over in Wales which is called Torpenhow Hill. That translates to hill. I wish I was joking about that. Oh, and when I said earlier that this is a natural river, and flooding can happen quite regularly for us, if you look on the right-hand side of the boat just here, I'll even point out with my pole as well, this line of moss that you can see all the way along there, that is where the water was 2 weeks ago. Gives you an idea of how quickly things can change on us. Usually we're not even open around about this time of year, so you folks have lucked out quite massively. Now, unfortunately, my colleagues don't seem to know we're here, so what we're going to do is we're going to float upstream for a little bit, we'll then spin around, and you'll be back on dry land.
Thank you. So at present, how deep is it?
Round about here, ooh, about 30 centimetres. So yes, it is quite shallow. But then again, that is why we adopted these boats in the first place. They can operate on the minimum, I believe, is 19 centimetres of water. We can operate 19 centimetres of water and we can transport nearly a half a tonne of cargo.